What the hell is Boulder? Seriously, why have we not asked more questions about this thing? I feel like just because we got him during the classic series that we've all just decided to give him a pass. Well, not anymore. It's time to finally dive in and take a look at this spherical mystery stone. Hello everybody, I'm Hero the Japanese Train, and welcome to episode 2 of my brand new series, Thomasified. Here, we take vehicles and other characters from the past, and we explain how they would fit in the Thomas universe. Boulder is a character I've always been fascinated by. My fascination began when I got the Rusty and the Boulder wooden railway set as a kid. I was mesmerized by sending Boulder hurtling into that signal box tower. No idea why Oliver was in this set though. Since then, Boulder's been at the top of the list to do a character gallery on for several years. In fact, many of you mentioned Boulder in the comment section of the first episode of this series. So, thank you viewers for giving me the motivation to finally tackle this character. To lay the groundwork for my characterization of Boulder, it would be helpful for me to explain my philosophy of just how Thomas characters are sentient to begin with. This is kind of a raging debate, and it's one that people either love to talk about or don't want to talk about at all. Personally, I do not subscribe to what I would call the Shed 17 version of explaining the sentience of the characters. I don't necessarily see the faces as like squishy flesh or anything like that. I view the faces as more of a metaphor for the character and personality that we receive from the vehicles. I think this aligns closest to how Audrey viewed things. The wheeshing and puffing of the steam engine directly related to the personality that engine had. So the faces are more a reflection of the personality we see in the character, not the other way around. On the other hand, Boulder does remind me of similar stone objects with literal faces carved in them, made across world history. One of my favorite time periods to teach about is early Mesoamerica. Boulder reminds me a lot of the 17 surviving large stone head figures that survive from the Olmec civilization, the oldest major civilization in the Western Hemisphere. These heads are unique and have their own individual features, and all were built between 1200 and 900 BCE.
Hi, HDJT in Post here. I also just had a theory that maybe because Boulder doesn't have any defined ears and other human features like the Olmec stone heads actually do, that's what makes Boulder more alive vehicle coded than just a human statue, because a bust of a statue, right, that wouldn't have a face in the sense of Thomas, that wouldn't be alive. So just more food for thought on that to kind of back up my theory.
Historians have debated on the purpose of these large stone heads. They may have been thrones that were turned into a stone portrait of the ruler who sat upon the throne after the ruler's death. They may have also been markers of a ruler's dominance over a certain territory, or perhaps seen as the guardians to a settlement or city. Also, as with most ancient ruins and relics, the heads would have probably been painted with bright colors. Can you imagine Boulder with really bright colors? That just sounds so cool to me. Okay, well, how does all this relate to Boulder? Well, it gives me a foundation to characterize him with, but also gets me thinking on how I would Sudrianize this round rock. So, here we go. I would probably date Boulder to some time around the Iron Age, maybe from between 700 BCE to 400 CE. Although I'd probably prefer the earlier of those dates. Why those dates? I'm going to argue that Boulder takes inspiration from the closest European counterparts to the Olmec heads, the ancient Celtic stone idols and figures, which were smaller head sculptures depicting Celtic gods and ancient warrior figures. These were not nearly as big as the Olmec heads, but they kind of remind me of Boulder.
Number one, we got Beanie. Number two, we got Heat. Number three, we got It. Number four, we got Beat. Number five, we got Number six, we got Cheat.
As I established in the first episode of this series and from the Reverend W. Awdry's book, The Island of Sodor, Its People, History, and Railways, Sodor's early history is highly influenced by Celtic culture in addition to Scandinavian, Scots, and English roots. Therefore, it stands to reason that whoever created Boulder was either a part of a Celtic culture or at least had contact with a Celtic culture. Because of geography, I think it's more likely that a boulder would be given a face to depict a god or goddess, and not a ruler's portrait like we see in Mesoamerica. I think there's a plausible story to be made if we give Boulder its roots in Celtic mythology. So, I started looking up different Irish Celtic gods associated with Boulder's behaviors in Rusty and the Boulder. Aggressive, mischievous, destructive, but also mysterious and alluring. There's kind of an element of revenge there too. If there were any Celtic god that would embody all of those features, it would be the Morrigan, the Celtic goddess of inciting war, the frenzy of battle, and a bringer of death. Whenever Boulder was made, he was originally a portrait of the Morrigan, used by this civilization as an idol or perhaps to ward off enemies. This got me thinking about other ancient sites on Sodor that we've seen either in the Railway series or TV series, and particularly along the Skarloey Railway, since that's obviously where Boulder lies. Immediately, my mind jumped to the Man in the Hills from the season 12 episode of the same name. Could these two ancient sites and figures possibly be connected? For the sake of storytelling, I'm going to say yes. So let's set the stage for who the heck built Boulder, why he was built, and why he wanted to kill Rusty. Thousands of years ago, the island was home to various settled agricultural communities, mostly of Celtic origin. These settlers would regale one another around the campfire with tales of the gods and other folk tales of great warriors passed down through the years, maintaining a connection from the current settlers to the ancestors long gone. The elder and chief of this tribe is only known to us today as the Man in the Hills, basically because of the large ancient drawing we have of him that was carved into the side of a hill. The Man in the Hills, from what we know, was a worshipper and priest, an old man who used his charm and wit to cooperate peacefully with the other tribes of the region. The landscape of the hills surrounding his lands was heavenly. The rivers and lakes were plentiful with fish to feed the people, and the area was rich with stone, iron, and slate for making tools. It was a peaceful society without much need for an army, a rarity among European settlements of the period. If we date the Man in the Hills' reign to sometime around 700 BCE, then it actually lines up pretty nicely with changes in the climate that occurred around the same time. Starting from about 1000 BCE and over the next couple hundred years, temperatures in the British Isles dropped and precipitation was higher. As a result, some communities had to abandon previously warmer agricultural lands and find new settlements. It can be assumed that Sodor was faced with this same period of climate instability. Let's say the dropping of temperatures and particularly rough winters led to drought for settlements at higher elevations. During the Man in the Hills' reign, starvation drove a tribe down from the mountains near Culdee Fell in search of new lands to conduct agriculture in. This was a smaller community compared to the Man in the Hills settlement, which was near the modern station called Lakeside, but they would have been more used to the harsh conditions. These mountain men were warriors who used iron weaponry and were strong at hand-to-hand combat. They were in no mood to negotiate with the paradise they encountered when they traveled down the mountain. At nightfall, the mountain men stormed the village from over the hills. They raided homes, stole food, and demanded precious goods. The Man in the Hills was awoken from his sleep and jumped from his bed. He opened his door to see the burning village and witnessed the carnage. He ran through the streets, urging his people to remain calm and maintain non-violence. He called out asking for the leader of the mountain men. The Man in the Hills turned a corner to see many of his subjects being slaughtered by the attackers. The writing was on the wall. The Man in the Hills ordered his subjects to evacuate the village. People were trampled as the frightened subjects fled for the woods. Now, the villagers were the ones without a home. The mountain men gorged themselves on whatever was edible. The villagers faced annihilation if they could not maintain a decent supply of food or shelter. The Man in the Hills was devastated. As a priest, he was at a loss for why the gods had punished him and his subjects. The people came to him asking what they should do. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Seemingly without a trace, the Man in the Hills vanished, lost among the hills that surrounded what used to be his lakeside settlement. When things seemed the most bleak, the Man in the Hills returned to what he valued most, his faith. He walked uphill for what seemed like an eternity until his legs gave out at the bottom of a large stone. He knelt in the rain, the droplets mixing with his tears. The Man in the Hills prayed for a sign. Just then, thunder clapped and lightning flashed, illuminating the stone in front of him. The Man in the Hills inspected the large stone. It was many times larger than he was. It was fairly round in shape, a little lumpy, but mostly round. The Man in the Hills ran back to his villagers. Some of the villagers were wailing at the loss of their loved ones. Others angrily demanded to know where their leader had just run off to. The Man in the Hills raised his wooden staff and pounded it on a rock to calm the emotional crowd before him. He gathered the survivors together. Then came the greatest speech those villagers would ever hear. The Man in the Hills was a great orator. Giving a long sermon amidst the roaring thunderstorm, he told his people he had just been given a message from the Morrigan, the Celtic goddess of revenge. He pointed to the thunder and lightning around them. Clearly, the Morrigan was in league with Tyrannus, the god of lightning, to send a message back to the villagers that they must fight back. To the priest, this meant a violation of one of the greatest principles of the village, nonviolence. Any historian would claim the desperation of the moment is what led to the villagers sacrificing their principles. The villagers would justify the violence as being officially sanctioned by the gods. After all, the Morrigan was the goddess of inciting war, revenge, and chaos in battle. How arrogant would the villagers be to reject the signs from the gods? The Man in the Hills led his villagers to the boulder. The angle was just right to launch an attack on the mountain men. All the boulder needed was a clear path and a push. The villagers moved obstacles out of their way. Branches and rocks were tossed aside. Nothing could be done about the trees. Boulder would just have to pinball around those. Meanwhile, the Man in the Hills and his strongest subjects began prying at the massive boulder with branches to try and get it loose. Only the flashes of lightning and the burning buildings gave the villagers enough light to work by. At last, a path was ready. All of the villagers gathered to pray to the Morrigan for a swift and successful revenge. They all gathered branches and rocks to use as clubs. When the Man in the Hills gave the signal, they pushed Boulder down the hill. The mountain men were having a raucous party, smashing temple idols and scarfing down food. They did not hear the boulder rapidly rolling down the hill. Before they could process what was going on, the boulder roared through the village. It bulldozed buildings, ripped up roads, and squished mountain men like bugs. The villagers poured into their town just behind the boulder, outnumbering the mountain men by more than double. A savage massacre followed. Rage and adrenaline took over. Non-violence was out the window. The mountain men were beheaded and their heads were kept as trophies. What? It's ancient history. It's not puppies and rainbows and unicorns. Right? I mean, were you really expecting me to say, luckily no one was hurt? Come on. At last, the village was reclaimed. However, the village was also destroyed. The Man in the Hills was a changed man. He built an army from the ground up from then on. The temple, destroyed in the fight, was rebuilt as a temple dedicated to the Morrigan. And outside the temple, was the boulder. The boulder had been retrieved. The blood of the vanquished was washed off, and the boulder was carved into a perfectly round spherical shape. The artisans used the iron weapons of the mountain men to carve the Morrigan's face into the boulder. Offerings were made to the Morrigan at the boulder, which was vibrantly decorated with paint and detailed facial features. Some of the villagers claimed you could see the boulder blink when a full moon was out, and that its eyes would watch you. The man in the hills was known from that point on as the great savior of the village, and proclaimed to be the favorite mortal among the gods. The village became increasingly warlike from that point on, dominating the region for centuries until the arrival of the Vikings wiped them out. And what about the man in the hills? He reigned for many more years until he passed away peacefully in his sleep. Upon his death, the boulder was taken to the top of a large cliff. The man in the hills was buried at the base of the cliff, where the boulder, the icon of the Morrigan, goddess of revenge, could always watch over the man in the hills' soul. Centuries passed. The beautiful paint faded and was lost to time. The village and its history were also lost to time. The boulder became a quirk of the local geography, but no one dared climb the cliff to investigate the boulder up there. Eventually, moss and lichens covered up any trace of the boulder's face. The boulder had been in slumber for over 2,000 years, until he met Rusty. Thump, thud, thump, thud, thump, thud, thump, thud. Boulder's crusted eyes cracked open for the first time in a long time. Out of his view, Thumper was busy at work crushing rocks at the base of the cliff. Boulder looked down and saw a little diesel rumbling along. He had never seen such a creature before. The creature looked up at Boulder, made a terrified squeak, and rushed away. Boulder tried to go back to sleep. Just then, the noise came again. Thump, thud, thump, thud, thump, thud, thump, thud, thump, thud, thump, thud, thump, thud. Truth be told, Boulder didn't sleep a wink that night as Thumper thumped away at the bottom of the hill. Morning came, and Boulder was still awake. He was furious. He had no idea what a quarry was, but they were noisy and uncomfortable. Dust kicked up into the air. Unnatural machines rumbled and grumbled about. The vehicles and workmen were trampling on the grave of Boulder's beloved man in the hills. Fury turned to rage. However, the more Thumper thumped, the looser Boulder became. All he needed was the right moment. Just as the goddess he was meant to embody, Boulder would seek vicious revenge on those who wronged him. And, well, you all know what happened next. Boulder tumbled off the cliff, chased Rusty, almost killed Percy, and made the sheds explode. What was in those sheds? But we've never considered things from Boulder's point of view. As Boulder slammed down onto the ground, he saw Rusty's terrified driver. A mountain man if he ever saw one. The Boulder could smell the aroma of blood and gore in the air. He wanted to kill again. The momentum propelled Boulder forward. He had never felt rails before. The guiding of the rails excited him tremendously. He could go as fast as he wanted without having to worry about hitting anything. Except for engines, that is. He missed Rusty. Oh well, there were plenty of other engines to smash. Revenge must be served. There's a red engine. Ah, he missed it again. Keep moving. Second red engine. Missed. Just keep going. Someone must pay. He rounds a bend. There's a little green pipsqueak screaming like a girl. He must be squished. Wait, what's going on? Missed again. There's a very strange temple up ahead. Then, flames and explosions everywhere. After the dust settled and the flames were put out, Boulder was moved to a hill closer to the Skarloey Railway's main yards, where he could be left alone. he often looked sadly over to the cliff that he had spent thousands of years on. Rusty believed that Boulder simply missed the mountain and wanted to be back up there, but Boulder really had two things on his mind. First, by being taken off the cliff, he was no longer able to protect the soul of the man in the hills. Second, he was sad that he would not get another chance at sweet, violent revenge. We hope that he won't ever get the chance again, right? Okay, this one took a turn, but you can't expect me to try and rationalize Boulder into the Thomas universe without making him a bloodthirsty murderer, now can you? Boulder was one of those characters I wanted to flesh out using a medium like Character Gallery, but this is my own personal take of Boulder using the lens of history. This is just my story, and everyone's obviously welcome to their own interpretation of this wacky guy, but personally, I am more so intrigued about the ancient statue that is killed once and wants to kill again angle than just retconning this guy from all of Thomas. Railway series purists, I guess, get your pitchforks. That'll do it for this one. Let me know your ideas for Boulder in the comments section below, and let me know which time periods you would like to see represented in this series. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video to make sure that my new Thomasified series doesn't become ancient history. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Hero the Japanese Train, signing off. I'll see you in the next one, guys.
He's just standing there, menacingly!